Welcome to the Product Quest podcast. Thank you for joining us on our journey to better understand innovation and product strategy. My name is Jan Vermut, and joining me as always, my co-hosts Scott Burleson and Jonathan Edwards. Today, we welcome our very special guest, Jim Kalbach. Anyone in the Jobs-to-be-Done space by now surely knows his name and work, but it's worth pointing it out again. So he's a noted author, speaker, and instructor in design, customer experience, and strategy. He's currently chief evangelist at Mural, the leading online whiteboard. He has written, I think, 3 books, designing web navigation. I have to admit, I didn't read that one. The other 2 I know. Mapping experiences, and most recently, the Jobs-to-be-Done Playbook, which I really, really recommend. He's also the co-founder and principal at the Jobs-to-be-Done Toolkit, which is an online resource with training and learnings and a lot of content on Jobs-to-be-Done. Jim blogs at experiencinginformation.com, and you can find him on Twitter under @JimKalbach. Is that kind of everything to say? Is there anything to add, Jim?
No, I think that's good. I realize this. I don't blog much anymore. So you can mention the blog, but it's a little dry out there, but yeah, that's fine.
So it has more moved to the Jobs-to-be-Done Toolkit.
Well, I don't blog there either. So it's just, yeah, I haven't been putting out a lot of content recently.
Okay. Anyway, thank you for being here. I just want to dive right in. Can we start a little bit? I've used this word Jobs-to-be-Done. You mentioned Jobs-to-be-Done Playbook. Of course, you're very well known for that. But when and how did you discover Jobs-to-be-Done? And what is it to you?
Sure. So my background is in design and human-centered design and innovation. I worked in a lot of UX teams, a little bit more on the upfront side of things, research and things like that. And it was 2003, I read Tony Olwick's article, Turn Customer Input into Innovation. And it struck me then, having been steeped in human-centered design techniques, that here, coming from the world of business, from business leaders, is this field and perspective called Jobs-to-be-Done. And I was immediately attracted to it, and thought that it could help me in my work and help me talk to other stakeholders and teammates that I was dealing with, and to leverage it. And I very slowly started to integrate just parts of it. Like I didn't read that article and then run a full ODI project. I just, wait a minute, an outcome is this. And I, thought about things a little bit differently. And then over was coming up on 2 decades now since I read that article, been using and trying out different ways of thinking about and using Jobs-to-be-Done. And that's what led to the book, was my experience and a lot of mistakes that I made. The book, the reason why I picked out some of those plays in the playbook is because I made mistakes with them, and I didn't want other people to make those same mistakes.
Yeah, I think it goes to show. If you read the playbook, if you have a look at it, it's kind of reflects the way you're talking now. So it's kind of, if you are in situation X, then why not use that kind of framework or tool or aspect of Jobs-to-be-Done? And if you're in a different context or situation, why not use something else? So I think that is is that fair to say?
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I see Jobs-to-be-Done as a perspective and a way of seeing. Some people want it to be a methodology, and then they go out and Google it and they find there's a couple of different approaches to it, right? And it's like, well, is that what Jobs-to-be-Done is? And for me, it's not a meat grinder. It's not just one method. That it's a perspective, it's a way of seeing. And over the past almost 2 decades, I had come across all these articles and different ways that people were using them, using Jobs-to-be-Done. And the book is really an homage to all those people who came before me. In fact, if you look in the book, there's nothing original in the book. Like I didn't invent job maps. I didn't invent job stories. I didn't, and I put all the references in there. So basically I wanted it to be a hub and spoke and say, Jobs-to-be-Done is this broad field. It's been around for several decades, and here are all the cool things you can do with it. And I'll give you a starting point, but go off and try it yourself. Go off and learn more from all these other great thinkers out there.
Yeah. It's very visible that you kind of connect all of the different studs. What do you say to somebody who is actually in that situation, they start around and Google jobs to be done, and then there's 1,000 different blogs and articles. I don't know what's the recommendation.
I mean, I don't know. It worries me. It worries me a lot. And I deal, particularly with the Jobs to be Done Toolkit. We do education, and I'm doing outreach to folks who raise their hand and say, I'm interested in jobs to be done. And I can see they're confused. Because it is a confusing landscape out there. And that's what I was striving to do with the book, was to hopefully provide some clarity there. But it still worries me a little bit. Even my own perspective, which I just described to you as, jobs to be done is a way of thinking. It's a framework. It's not a process. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, which for me, I like fields and frameworks like that, because I want to be influenced. And I always run projects the way that I want to run them. Like I never follow a recipe book. So for me, that was great. But not everybody can operate that way. It's kind of like walking on a high rope without a net. You know what I mean? So people need more of a net. And I worry about that, because I do think the field of jobs to be done, it can get people out on a limb, and it can feel risky because they don't know. It's uncertain and they're not sure. And then there's no steps, after, even if you read my book, it's like, well, what do I do now? I brought this all to my stakeholders and they didn't like it, or what do I do now? So there's a lot of practical things that I worry about setting people up for failure.
Yeah.
I hope I don't do that. I hope I don't do that, Jan, Scott, Jonathan, but I hope we're not setting people up for failure.
No, I don't think so. I mean, you're really out there and educating and kind of evangelizing. I don't know how you can say that, but you're really out there, really trying to fish them all in and try to get them to an understanding. I mean, the feedback that I've seen, at least on your courses and your trainings, are pretty good. So I think you're doing a good job.
I mean, well, and that's what I spent, the past 5, or before I wrote the book, I had been doing a workshop on jobs to be done. And really what I was trying to do there was learn how to talk about jobs to be done and listen to the questions that people had, right? So I tried to be as proactive as possible in the book. But then I launched the book, and I realized that it wasn't enough, that it was even, for all the clarity that you might find in the Jobs to be Done playbook, there's still lots of open ends and questions. And if I were to rewrite that again, there's a lot of things I would include and even rephrase or recalibrate, because I've learned a lot in the past 2 years since the book came out on how to speak about jobs to be done. The other thing I would have done was included Scott's book in there, but I don't think it was out yet. But that's one of my favorite books on jobs to be done is The Statue in the Stone.
Yeah, I think we have never mentioned it on the podcast before, but it's the book that kind of is the reason why we're sitting here. So anyway.
Well, it's sort of funny it's like all of us, actually all 4 of us, I believe, connected on Twitter initially, which is sort of a funny, it's just a funny way to meet people that you actually develop relationships with. It's sort of a funny commentary on our era.
Yeah.
Modern times. Yeah.
I want to kind of get a little bit into 2 things that you mentioned, Jim, which I think they all kind of connect to what we've been talking about. So a lot of what you've been speaking about is about language. So on the one hand, like Jobs Done really provides a language, you said, to speak to other functions within a company. Yeah. It has a great advantage, I think, which is that probably connects to why it disperses so quickly throughout the internet, and everybody can speak about it.
Right.
And it also has this power to connect. So I want to just, why is that? Where does this come from? Why is Jobs to be Done so good at or such a good language to kind of make these connections?
Yeah, I think because it is solution agnostic. I mean, and that's kind of the power of Jobs to be Done, and the principles behind the theory, why it works the way that it works, is because you're being solution agnostic, right? And that helps you then switch your perspective, because it is a switch in perspective. Hey, let's look at things from a completely different perspective. Sometimes I call it an out-of-body experience.
Yeah,
like you're working in a company for a brand, and like you float out of your body and you look back down on it, and then you come back in your body. It's you don't stay out there. You come back in. No worries here. We're not asking you to change fundamentally forever. Yeah. It's just float out of your body, look back in, because you're going to see things from in a different light, right? And so I think that's really powerful, and that's reflected in the actual language of Jobs to be Done. And one of the things that I learned when teaching Jobs to be Done over the past couple of years is that I focus a lot on the language. Sometimes if you take my course, you're like, why is Jim worried about the verbs that you're using for steps and things like that? And it's like, well, that's where, if you don't get that right, you don't get the solution agnostic and you don't get the perspective shift, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And then, so to your other question, though, I think then what you end up with is an artifact that's not owned by any one discipline. It's not a marketing customer journey map showing the top of the funnel, right? And then the engineer says, yeah, but that I can't relate to that, or vice versa. It's not a user story map where marketing people don't see what. It's something that's kind of stands in the middle. And what I find is that people approaching Jobs to be Done from their own disciplines can see themselves in it, right?
Yeah.
So, when I'm just using a job map as an example, a marketing person is going to see a job map differently than an engineer will, but they're looking at the same thing. You know what I mean? Yeah. And for that reason, I think Jobs to be Done has kind of a multiplicity of functions. It's a research framework. It's a way to help focus and prioritize, but it's a collaboration tool as well, too. Right. Yeah. And the connection that you said, I think for me is almost more important than, the results that you get from a study. It's like, okay, you can get those results, but are the teams who have to execute against that or decide against that for funding or whatever, are they aligned? Are their hearts and minds aligned? Right. So yeah. the solution agnostic nature and the language that's in Jobs to be Done for me feels way more universal than other frameworks. And that's why you can pull people in and they can see themselves in the work.
Yeah. I think that's totally true. I mean, it's also in a way, I mean, you could almost from a very distance, you could always say, well, but the language is so plain. Yeah. Right. I mean, a job is just to get from A to B. I mean, that's very abstract, but to get from A to B, or I don't know, to prepare a hot beverage in the morning or something like that. But that's so, on the one hand, it's such a simple language, but I think it's this strictness on staying simple and that actually that opens it up to everybody.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. And, there's a lot of hype around Jobs to be Done and people have a lot of expectations for it. And then you might show them, a simple job and map it out and find outcomes and emotions around it. And their answer is, yeah, no, duh. That's obvious. I'm like, well, that's a good thing, though. That obviousness of the result is actually good. And I think that's the relatability of Jobs to be Done, is because it is prepare a hot beverage in the morning. What do you do before, during, and after? Okay, I got it. Yep. Okay. But did you know that before, or were your teams talking about the same thing before? And the answer there is often no. We had three different impressions what preparing a hot beverage was, and you put it out there and it looks obvious. But what's not obvious is the aligning effect, the power that has to align everybody. That's not obvious.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think, I mean, I don't know what your experience is, but the alignment is one of the key issues in companies today. I mean, at least that is my experience. So teams or different teams to get them into one room. I mean, or even if it's digitally, but get them into one room, that is kind of a challenge in itself. And then getting them to speak the same language and then kind of look at the same thing. Yeah, it's not easy.
Companies don't lack ideas on what to do, whether it's strategy or bugs in a software or marketing campaigns or sales leads. There's no lack of things out there to do. The problem is focus and prioritizing that. Where are we actually going to place our bets? Yes. Right. And sometimes the rationale for that bet is finance. We can't afford it, or we can afford it, or it's technology. We're building on this platform. What Jobs to be Done says is no, make the rationale for your focus, make that customer centric, human centric, right? Yeah. That your team should be rallying around what your OKRs are for the next quarter based on customer input, right?
Yeah. I like this kind of this almost slip in language that you had there, where you said customer centric, and then you were human centric. Yeah. Can you elaborate that? But because I think it's important.
Yeah. It's good. Yeah, you'll notice in the book, I went through all kinds of contortions and gyrations in my book to avoid the word user and to avoid the word customer. And I think I did that in a couple situations where it made sense, but otherwise I talk about individuals, I talk about people, I talk about humans. And I think by using us and me and others in the field using language like that, it reinforces the perspective shift, right?
Yeah.
And even something as harmless as a customer journey map, right? I wrote a book about customer journey maps, but that comes with so much bias because what you're saying, what you're admitting up front is we're going to look at the people that we serve as customers. We're literally seeing it's in the title of the thing. It's a customer journey map. You're seeing that person across from you as a customer or user experience. You're seeing them as a user. And I think saying, no, they're individuals, they're humans, they're people. That's how you get that agnostic effect, right?
Yeah.
That you're really looking at making a hot beverage in the morning, right? Or whatever it might be, scheduling a physical examination, like whatever that job might be, you're not looking at it through the lens of a product, solution, or brand, right? And by saying customer or user, you almost automatically do that because you're seeing them as a customer, you're seeing them as a user. So I've been talking about human-centered business because human-centered design is not enough. It's not enough that we do human-centered design. The whole business has to be human-centered. And I have an article out there. It's called Human-Centered Business.
Yeah.
Right? And really, and a very, very intentional use of the word human there. So I'm glad you called it out, Jan, because I do have an opinion on that.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I of course I know the article, and I think you really have a point there. I mean, somehow customer is already introduces a certain kind of hierarchy, or a certain kind of distance, which doesn't have to be there. I mean, sometimes it makes sense to call people customers, but let's not start with that and bring all the bias that we already have in there. Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, customer journey map is a great view to have for a company. You want to optimize the customer journey, right? You want to make it easier for people to consume your solution. That's a source of growth as well too, right? So I'm not saying don't do customer journey maps. I'm just saying let's be very clear that these are highly biased, egotistical artifacts, right? And it makes the assumption that the human being or the individual that you're serving even needs your stupid solution. They might not, right? But you're making that assumption before you even go out there. They are a customer of mine. They need my solution, and at the end, they're going to give me a good NPS score. Well, that's egotistical, right?
Yeah.
So it's fine,
Completely
right? Because you get it, you leave your body, but you have to come back. That's fine. We all have bodies that we inhabit, which is great. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but let's recognize it for what it is, right?
Yeah.
And there's customer centricity and human centricity, and those are two different things.
Yeah. I think it was Scott, I think you mentioned this, where you say, well, at least once I remember when I had a discussion where you said, Jobs-to-be-Done describes the true relationship between a customer and the company, because it could very well be the way you're describing it, that there is no relationship at all. I mean, that I might be putting out a solution out there into the market, but there are people there are people in the world that get the same job done with a solution that has nothing to do with whatever I'm providing.
Right. Yeah. No, I'd agree with that. And you did the air quotes around the word customer because there is a convenience for using words that other people will understand, right? And all the gyrations and contortions that I talked about by me avoiding those words, you end up with phrases like the people that you serve. So you could have said the people that you serve instead of customers, right?
Yeah.
But you might not serve them, so even the people that you serve is wrong, right? So that's where you end up with human. But sometimes it's not. It doesn't. Sometimes it's too abstract to say humans. There are humans out there that have jobs, and then you're sitting there and you're the owner of a business. You're like, I don't care about it. I only care about my customers. And it's like, well, that's fine too, to have that perspective. So we do use the word customer, right? In fact, the article that I mentioned, turn customer input into innovation. It assumes that they're customers, but they might not be.
Yeah. And Jonathan, you wanted, go on.
Yeah, no, I mean, I just wanted to put a little caveat in there saying that, especially when you're dealing with more complex situations, typically in B2B, it's obviously important to maybe distinguish who the human is that you're actually discussing. So, are we talking about let's say the user of the product? Are we talking about the buyer? Are we talking et cetera, different stakeholders who will play a role in acquiring your product or service? And of course, so I just wanted to make that point.
Yes. No, I'm glad you made that point too, actually, because I talk about identifying what I call the job performer. And in B2C situations, it's often easier because the consumer and the buyer are one person. But when you get into the B2B world, you have to map out your stakeholders. because the buyers and the installers and the trainers and all the other people around it are kind of stand in what I call the value chain. So as an innovation provider, there's this value chain of how value flows, and it flows downstream, right? And then the conclusion of this talk, I say, and then there's the end user, and I say the word user, right? Because ultimately we're in the innovation business, and we're going to have something that people adopt, or what do you call that? The adopting population? No, it's the end user. I don't say the adopting population. I say the end user. And the point I make is that Jobs-to-be-Done it looks at the value stream in reverse order, right? So you start at the end and you work back towards the purchase decision, right? And Jonathan, I use the word end user when I give that talk because I don't have a better way to describe that the end of that chain, So we do use these words, but I like to try to avoid them and correct myself like I just did before.
which is I think language is always going to change. I mean, but can we get maybe I want to go into a little bit of a different part or an addition to what maybe helps to connect. So I think language is a very important part. It's kind of that plays a role, and we should always kind of be thinking about it.
Yeah.
There is another thing, and in mapping experiences, you write a beautiful sentence. I just picked it out there. You write there, visualizations are a key device to break down siloed thinking. So I kind of want to get into a little bit into visualization. What does that play a role? How does it relate to jobs to be done? Because I know you're we talk a lot about language now, but you're a very visual thinker or doer, actually.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think a lot of that, the feeling behind that quote that you just read was a lot of my experience working in design teams, which is, the design is like 50% like design craft and 50% having conversations with other people. I call design a full contact sport, because if you're a designer, anybody with two eyeballs can look at your work and has an opinion about your work. Right. So a lot of what designers do is they're going out and trying to harmonize perspectives in the world, because they get handed requirements, and then the engineers have a perspective, and marketing and legal comes in, and then the product owners, and then the user, the end users have their opinion. So a lot of it is this harmonization. So I think a lot of what the design work that I had done in the past was around facilitating conversations. Right. It was literally, hey, I have this idea and we have evidence that this is the right idea. I got to get all these other people to kind of see that, because I was in a privileged position. And I think a lot of designers and researchers are, in that I had contact with our market. Right. There's a lot of people in an organization that don't talk to people in their markets ever, like most people in the organization. So I felt it was incumbent on me to retell that story back to the organization, right? Because I had sat right next to users in their place of work and saw them struggling, or heard what their pain points were with and without our product, right? And I just wanted to retell those stories. So I could come back and write a 50-page report of everything that I did. But what happens to 50-page reports when you send it around to a team, right? They don't.
Everybody sits down.
They all read it and underline it with their highlighters. Exactly. And then send me a critique back.
Right. That's exactly what happened.
I think that's what people do too, as well. No, they delete the email. Like the subject line on the email's got to be good before they even open it. And if they do open it, do they connect what's on page 2 with what's on page 27? Are they seeing cause and effect? Right. So what I discovered was, and not only through my own work, this was through scanning what was kind of going on, that there is this whole class of activity around mapping and creating visual diagrams, service blueprints, customer journey maps, workflow diagrams, the list goes, mental model diagrams from Indy Young, all these things. And for me, they were conversation tools. It was something that you don't make a visualization to create a map, because if you do that, you have wallpaper. You need to activate it, and you need to say, okay, we're going to have a workshop or an exercise, or we're going to analyze this. It's a diagnostic tool. And if you don't do the diagnosing as a group of people, then it provides no value back to you. But the visual nature of things, it compresses information so that you don't have 50 pages, you have 1 page, and you can see cause and effect on the same page. And it's also compelling that I've had people, I put a diagram on a wall, like literally physical wall, and people walk over to it and say, tell me more, right? People don't walk over to a 50-page report and say, tell me more. You missed something, Jim, right? So it's this lean in effect that I think visual tools have for us. And when you're talking about experience, which is what I wrote my last book on, mapping it out was a great way to take a big fuzzy concept and make it visual. Now, within Jobs to be Done, there's this thing called the job map, which if you look at examples of job maps, I want to try to make that more of a conversation tool. And I actually have a way that I like to do job maps, because you want to also facilitate a conversation using that thing, right? And I have specific ways that I do that. I would love to get a little bit into that, because I mean, I think even the job map itself has different applications, and I love that you're using it to have the right kinds of this conversation. The right kind of conversation.
Can you tell us a little bit how that works? I mean,
yeah, sure. So there's a couple of things that I do to maintain the solution agnostic vibe and atmosphere in the room. The first thing I like to do is walk through the job map, and very often having somebody else like read it. Or somebody else, analyzing it. So it's not just me walking through it. So they have to stand up or lean into the Zoom call and actually engage and read it. So the first thing I do is you put it out there and say, do we understand getting that job done together? And I'll even ask, is there anything I missed? Right? Is there anything you disagree with? Right? So open up the conversation about getting the job done. And I found nothing better than a map to do that. Because you get the beginning, middle, and end, right? You don't necessarily get all the outcomes and the emotions and the circumstances, but you get that scaffolding of your innovation space. You've mapped out your innovation space, and you have the wireframe of that innovation space based on the job map. So I think it's a really great conversation tool. It's also very chronological, and it tells a little story, right? You want to prepare a hot beverage in the morning. There's a before, during, and after, and you get that story, right? So there's a little bit of narrative storytelling that I think makes that conversation just slightly more immersive, simply by putting that out there. Then what I like to do is then compare something to that job map, and it's usually your own solution. Could also be competitors, and to do that not in a scientific way, but it's just have a discussion. And the question that I've had a lot of traction with is, go through each of the columns, because I like to do job maps in columns, and I'll actually have what I call stages and steps. So I have a stage and then a couple of steps, and I'll go stage by stage and say, how well do we perform in supporting the job performer at that stage? So you think of your own solution. Yeah. Stage 1, 2, 3. And then people give school grades. I do it with the school grades.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Somehow you kind of mixing up the idea of it seems to me it's like a mix of the customer journey map, kind of approach with the job map. So you have
yes, and it's not a customer journey though, because a customer journey is, how do people become aware of us? Why did they decide to purchase us? And why do they stay loyal to us? Those are the 3 telltale signs of the customer journey map, by the way. In this, it's how do I turn on the hot pot to make water in the morning, or not even hot, how do I warm up water, whatever you're doing, right? So it's a completely different perspective. And I actually did this exercise once, Jonathan, and I had to explain that to the stakeholder. I had to say, this isn't a customer journey map, because it's not how people come to us and use us. This is just what they're doing independent of us. And he stopped and he said, I've never thought about it that way before, right? And then we went into the discussion of understanding the map, and then you compare. You need to do that in 2 steps, though: understand it and compare it. But and this is the perspective shift that I think is important. So it resembles a customer journey map, and you're actually going to get a lot of that confusion. So you have to explain that it's not. But the activity is very, very much like what I talk about in mapping experiences in that book there. So you're spot on, Jonathan.
So are the stages sort of like high level, high level?
Yeah.
Maybe you can explain that a little more.
Well, so there's this concept of a universal job map, which I'm sure you're familiar with, Scott, right? Yeah. What is it? Define, locate, gather, confirm, right?
Execute, yeah.
It's that, but you relabel it to make it relevant to your field that you're in, right? So if you're preparing a cup of water, right, you might not say define, you might say, I don't know, there might be a better word for preparing a hot beverage in the morning. So I use it's a similar framework. So what you tend to end up with job maps, the way that I think about stages and steps, you tend to end up with 7 to 9 stages And guess what? There's 8 stages in the universal job map. So it kind of looks like those universal stages, but then you relabel them to be specific to your domain. Because I find things like confirm and locate. Locate? What do you mean, Jim? It's like, well, prepare or set up. I often you'll see like plan, prepare, set up, and then and then make your hot beverage or whatever those labels are. And then there'll be a stack of steps underneath it, 2 to 4 steps underneath that. The reason why I like to do it that way is because I know I can facilitate a sequenced conversation with my team and say, we're going to take each one of those columns and we're going to talk about it phase by phase and grade ourselves. And we're going to give a score on how well we do. And then what you get is, it's not scientific. It's just the team's impression of where they think their problem is. And then you can dive into that column and go into more detail there as well too. So the reason why I like to do that is because I can facilitate better conversations with that style of job map.
That's so interesting. What are they scoring? Are they scoring how well they're able to do?
How well their solution supports the job performer at each one of those stages. How well do we help people prepare making a hot beverage? How well do we help people set up a hot beverage? How well do we help people follow up or conclude making a hot beverage in the morning? Right?
What I love so much about what you just described is it seems like for everybody that ends up at Jobs to be Done as seeing the value of it, it's like you have this other experience prior to that, and you brought this other deep expertise, and you really added to what Jobs to be Done is, and I think that's pretty awesome. I'm gonna have to ask you more about these stages later, but I think when even the grading of it, that's something I'd never. It was just part of like a framing exercise early on in a project, sort of determine where you want to innovate.
Yeah, exactly. Like I said, people don't lack ideas in an organization. Developers don't lack bugs to fix. Marketing programs don't lack targets to address. The question is, where are you going to focus? And by having that conversation, you get the hearts and minds of people, right? Because they were there, they feel ownership, right? And I've done it the other way, where you might do a prioritization and then say, here are your top unmet needs, and you present it to people. But that's a lean back experience, and you don't necessarily get buy-in and ownership there. Not from the collaborative, connected. You mentioned the word connected, Jan. Like people, you got to get the light bulbs going. So I see Jobs to be Done as a collaboration tool to help people get the light bulbs going in their minds.
Definitely. Absolutely. And so this grading of the different stages, you do this internally with you're not going out to humans it's really a kind of an internal
you could exercise. Do that, and as you guys know, there are more scientific ways to survey people on steps and outcomes and things like that, which you could combine. But I've talked to a lot of teams who are like, it's not that they have like little resource and money, they like, I have no money and no resources, what can I do? And I'm like, create a job map and bring it into your team and have a discussion on it, because it's really low budget. And the bang for the buck is huge in terms of the team, the connection that you get with the team, bringing your work to them, right?
And also, if I may just dig in just a bit more on the, usually in Jobs to be Done, we will grade the satisfaction and importance, the opportunity, let's say, of the desired outcomes or the needs, more colloquially said. But here you're kind of giving a grade, an overall grade to the stage, which is basically a job step in the job map.
It's like a meta step,
Okay,
and
got
the
it.
only reason you do that is so you can have a more focused conversation.
Okay.
Right. Let's talk about setting up, to get this job, and why did everybody say we suck right there? And then you hear all these things that you don't hear otherwise. So the conversation is new and different, right? Okay. Well, now what are we going to do about that next quarter, right? And then you come up, and then so it's really just a focusing effect, right? It's not scientific, and
makes sense.
You can call me out on that and say, yeah, but Jim, that's not what your customers are saying, right? So yes, but sometimes you don't have the bandwidth or the runway to be able to do anything more scientific or rigorous.
A huge point. I want to build on that. A huge point you mentioned is a lot of teams don't have the resources, time, and maybe an old school purist would say we have to do all this qual with this number, and you have to do surveys, et cetera. So, but then yet for years, there certainly have been voice of the customer practitioners that have been quite comfortable with just qualitative methods only. How does this different level of rigor fall into sort of your approach?
I see it as a scale. And that's why I was trying to position Jobs to be Done as a way of thinking. And there's a range of techniques out there. I call them plays in my playbook. And you can adopt that way of thinking just by doing one of them. You can put them together and make a whole recipe. You can do a full-on proper Jobs to be Done project as well, too. So it's a range of things that you can do. Because what I found, a lot of people coming into the field, and they're like, I can't do that. Like it's too big. And they might not need that either, to be honest with you, as well, too. It's kind of like, you don't need a 747 to go around the corner and buy some milk. You know you know what I mean? I just need a skateboard, Scott, you know? And it's like, Jobs to be Done does skateboarding too, you know? And you can, let's just do this little out of body experience for 2 hours and with a job map and come back as a team. Does that help? I found that helps a lot, actually. Yeah. It also helps, by the way, set up those bigger projects as well too. Because then you get people saying, oh, can we do more of this? Or, hey, Jim, that was great, but it was very qualitative, wasn't it? And you say, I'm glad you asked. Yes. I know how to put more rigor into it. Would you fund that? Right? Yeah.
No, I think it's very close. I mean, even if I don't know, it would be nice to see a little bit who is actually attending then your courses and so on, because I think often when we talk to startups, they have exactly this issue. I mean, they somehow get drawn to the method and they see the value of it and they immediately kind of realize there's something in there, and then but I can't stop for 3 months. Right. I don't have
and I don't have 100.
3 months for a startup is you're dead afterwards. I mean, exactly. And then how can we just get started? How just we can get started and take baby steps, because they're already extremely valuable. I mean, they can open up, as you said, or what was it? The light bulb.
They get the light bulb going on. You want those ahas to click as well too. And I think that's as important as the rigor in the research. I'm not saying don't do the rigorous research. That's great too. But sometimes you need to take baby steps to be able to get the permission to do that, or the runway to be able to do that too. That's why I love your spin cycle over at Venbridge so much, because that's the collaboration. That's the team. That's the teamwork part of it. That's Jobs to be Done as a collaboration tool.
I think that's why I was extremely drawn to your book. I think that if you read it here and there and everywhere, basically, you're showing how it can bring people together. Right. And what we're trying to do, I mean, Jobs to be Done is also just a tool. Let's be, right. I mean, as
it's a means to an end.
And you should be aware. Exactly. It's just one of the solutions, but it's one of the best that I've found. So, but it's really, it has this effect. I mean, as you said it before, you can bring them in a framing phase and just have a workshop, and everybody can participate. And suddenly engineers and marketing sit at the same room, and they don't, and because usually they have the feeling that nobody understands. An engineer has the idea, and probably they're right. Nobody understands what they're actually doing. Yeah. But so does marketing. And so,
agree.
But a workshop like that can really bring them together.
I agree.
And then later on in the what we call spin phase. So it is really about working with the results. I mean, you found something out, and now how do you actually get people to do something with it? Because very often in our experience, you do a whole project, you do even the quant, and you bring it into the organization, and everybody says, okay, thank you. And nothing happens. And that's just...
And back to Jonathan's point, that's what I learned from mapping experiences, customer journey maps, experience maps, because I would always associate those projects with a workshop. If somebody said, hey, Jim, we want to do an experience map, I say, great, we're going to do a workshop in a month, because I know that you have to work with it's not the deliverable, right? It's not the map, it's the mapping, it's the verb. It's not the noun, it's the verb kind of thing. So then when I started to upgrade my use of Jobs to be Done, I carried that thinking over and really saw the method, the approaches, the activities as communication tools. And I can't tell you how many times when I did mapping workshops, for instance, it was the first time that the marketing person and the engineer were even in the same room. I was the cause of that, because I brought them together for that. Yeah. So it's the catalyst for those level conversations in your organizations.
Yeah, I mean, definitely the output can obviously be very valuable of, let's say, Jobs to be Done endeavor. But as you say, I think a great benefit is just getting people aligned and talking, using the same terminology, right, understanding each other, and looking at the same things. And I think that is a very powerful aspect.
One of my personal measures of success in the roles that I've been in the past is when another stakeholder uses my words or my slide in their presentation, right? And very often without any attribution, right? So I'll see a persona or some statement or something like, and it's like, and they present it as a matter of the fact and as their own. And I'm like, yes, I won. And then, 6 months later, a year later, you see your stuff in other people's slides. Like, you win at that point in time when that happens, right? Yeah. It's not an insult. That's a KPI. Right? Yeah.
and actually, I had a question for you, because I know you're a jazz musician. Yes. You play bass, yeah? And I can see it there. I dabble in bass myself too. And actually, I was thinking, as we're talking about this and alignment and everything, do you see any parallels in the way you play jazz and, or let's say jazz in general, and how you would approach design and innovation? And do you bring some things from one to the other?
I do. I mean, it's in my mind, it all makes sense, right? It's like, it's me, but a lot of people ask that question because they're like, how did you get from music to this? I do see some similarities. I think I tend to be on the more generative side of things. So like I'm a creator, right? And, how do you fill a blank page of music with notes if you're writing a song? Mm-hmm. How do you improvise a jazz song, that you don't know where it's going to begin or end? And so it's just that mindset of I want to create something. So for me, and I think that's part of the reason why I see Jobs to be Done as a collaboration tool, because I'm not looking at Jobs to be Done as a scientific analytic tool or a management tool. Like, how do we know we're doing this over time? For me, it's we want to create something new. So that just this mindset of, willingness to be on the more generative side of things rather than on the summative side of things. And if you read Mapping Experiences, my other book that we've already mentioned here a couple of times, that it's kind of the same thing, is that, these are tools of creativity, of generation, on that side of it. So that's kind of the link and the mindset that I see, that links the music side of me to the mapping and the Jobs to be Done side of me.
Okay, well, that's very. I think. Go on. Sorry, I didn't.
No. I was just. Go ahead.
I think I was looking around, and I think I found you can buy 2 albums, right? You have 2 albums out, jazz music albums. Is that right or not?
No, I don't have any albums. I have books.
Anyway, so maybe I was.
I wrote some books on. Bass, yeah. Actually.
What I'm seeing is we need a band of just all jobs to be done.
And it's instrument agnostic.
When people introduce themselves, like in my courses, I always look if there's a band in there. Like I'm asking people what their hobbies are, and then I always try to form a band. Sometimes you get a band, sometimes you don't.
At the beginning of workshops, sometimes you have these little questions, just a little
right, exactly.
And one of the ones I would ask is, what's your favorite concert you ever went to and why? And let me tell you, there's a lot of hidden headbangers out there. Not just.
Are you a hidden headbanger? I see the Stratocaster back there. What? Yeah.
Yeah. Back in the day, I have
closet headbanger over there.
I have some very old black T-shirts that don't fit anymore.
So you mentioned, Jim. You mentioned your courses. I think we should kind of get that out as well. I mean, you're doing these Untangled sessions, which are free to everybody, if I'm correct. So you can just join there once or twice, a month. I don't know exactly
We're doing those once a month.
Okay.
They started off with kind of a webinar concept, but they've turned into what we're calling community calls or community webinars. And the platform that we're using for that is Zoom, and we switched from Zoom webinar to just the regular Zoom because the focus is mostly on the community. That recently we've been having guests, and Jan and Scott, I'll have to have you as guests next, Jonathan, have been guests for like 20 or 15 minutes even. And then the rest of it is questions from the audience. And we actually have them then come on, their webcams are on and they're talking. So I think the way that we're using the platforms and setting that up, it's mostly conversation with people in the community. And we find that people like that. And it seems to be the most valuable to kind of open it up that way. So we've been doing those community calls once a month, usually the last Tuesday of a month at 12 noon Eastern time. We got one coming up next week, actually. Probably podcast won't be out by then, but at the end of the month, we do those calls. And then we also have some courses that we're doing about once every other month. That's a training course. We're doing them across 3 days. It's 2 hours a day across 3 days. And we do that so that there can be self-paced learning and quote unquote homework in between as well too. It's hard to do 8 hours on a Zoom call. We do them all remote. We found that if you do kind of this lunchtime kind of thing, 2 hours a day, 2 hours a day, 2 hours a day, and then you have time to think about it and do a little bit of homework, that it's a really nice format that's kind of light for everybody. It's easy for us to put on. And in those courses, so it's 6 hours of coursework, and then there's some videos and homework outside of that. So it's probably about 8 or more hours of content that you can consume. And there I go through what I call the core process. So at all the plays in my playbook, people ask me then, okay, where do I get started? And the answer is, well, you can get started anywhere actually, but here's a core process. And that's what the course focuses on: scoping your jobs to be done landscape, what jobs are you going to go after, studying them, doing the research, and then create a job map. So the name of the course is actually job maps from beginning to end, because what I wanted to do is give people a project that they can go from beginning to end with. And I think the first best thing you can do is create a job map. And then we talk about how do you find opportunities, and I talk about how to run workshops with job maps. That's one of the things we talk about in there. So there's like 4 or 5 steps that basically break up into different modules across those 3 sessions. But I basically say at the end of the course, if you want to get started in Jobs to be Done, do these 4 steps: scope, research, create a job map, and then find opportunities from it.
I love the idea of beginning with the job map, because if I'm not careful, I'll bore myself to tears with all kind of abstract language. But with a job map, anybody can. How do you wash your clothes? I mean, you'll have to coach them along the way. Oh, that's a solution, whatever. But in coaching of a job step, you're helping them to learn how to write a job statement.
That's literally the meat of the course. Is how do you listen for, how do you write job steps? Okay, now let's arrange that into a chronology. Same thing with outcomes. We get a little bit into outcomes. How do you listen for and write outcomes? And then what can you do with it? But the focus is on a job map because it's something that is self-evident. It's very relatable. And that's why I like job maps as that conversation piece. Right? Because it's not obtuse or abstract or, scientific in any way. You put it up on the board and any stakeholder can walk over to a job map and say, beginning, middle, and end. I see how that job gets done. Right?
I love it because as Jobs to be Done practitioners, whether we ever wanted to or not, find ourselves in the role of being a sort of a teacher. But otherwise, because if it's this language and we're the only one who has it, it's literally worthless. And so, you sort of grow in your progression from just curious about it, learning about it, executing it, but then very soon, it's not a solo activity at the end of the day.
So who are the people that are showing up, or that maybe even on the other question that should show up? I mean, who kind of
is this that's a good question. It reminds me of when I was writing my book, the publisher was like, well, who's the audience for this? I'm like, anybody. No, we don't take anybody as an answer, right? Anybody who wants to read a book. Okay, no, that's not a good answer either. We've been focused on it's more of an attitude than a role or a discipline. And we've been focused on what we call change makers. So people who are in situations where they want to shift the conversation or nudge the strategy in a different direction, basically innovators, right? Which could come from any, traditional role type. I think because of my background and people who follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter and things like that, we do tend to get a lot of designers that come to that, researchers as well too. But we do find a lot of product managers, marketing folks, and entrepreneurs. So, even startup founders and things like that. And those, if I had to name like 5 groups, it would be designers, people in innovation, product managers, marketers, and then entrepreneurs or startup folks.
But I love how you kind of describe them around the job that they want to get done. Like if they want to affect change within the company, then that's kind of, that goes across, that can come from anywhere within the, more or less anywhere at least.
Right. And it's the type of change too. And again, this goes back to Jobs to be Done as a conversation tool. It's the type of change that is much more grassroots, right? So what I don't get in my webinars or courses are CEOs who could legislate a change, right, from the top down. It's change makers. The qualification that I didn't mention is change makers who want to have a grassroots movement inside of their organization.
Yeah.
I actually had a question because your background is in design, and I have noticed talking with various people that often people who come from a design background actually push back quite a bit on Jobs to be Done. And famously, one high-profile designer, Jared Spool, also wrote quite a few articles around Jobs to be Done. Very interesting, though. I mean, it's very interesting to get that perspective. But one discussion we've been having is to try and understand what, for some people, it just clicks, right? You tell them, you talk, you explain the basics of Jobs to be Done. They go, yeah, I got it. I love it. It makes total sense. Yep. And others, for some reason, just really reject it. And we're kind of wondering what your theory might be around what, why do some people get it and others don't?
Yeah, I know Jared pretty well, actually. And we even did a webinar together where he interviewed me about Jobs to be Done because he's this big Jobs to be Done denier or Jobs to be Done naysayer. I don't know what you call it. I've kind of found this curve. I've been thinking about this recently, Jonathan. There's this curve. You guys know the uncanny valley? Like if something becomes more lifelike, you get to this point where if it's too lifelike, but not lifelike enough, it's weird.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So there's this kind of uncanny valley. It's not really an uncanny valley, but there's this curve where you get practitioners and people, and it seems to be the more expert they get, the more they take Jobs to be Done until a point. And it's really people who are really, really, really experts in human-centered design or UX that I've found that are like, yeah, this Jobs to be Done thing, it's nothing. Nothing to see here, folks. Don't pay no attention to the man behind the curtain kind of effect. And I don't know what's going on there, but my theories are somewhere between. There's a belief that this already exists, and I've heard that many, many times. Oh, that's what we're doing over there. That's goal-directed design, human-centered design, task analysis. Jobs to be Done is nothing more than task analysis.
Well, the job map, for instance, that's often what people say. Well, job map is just task analysis. Yeah.
Right. However, so I can't find any example from task analysis that doesn't mention a solution.
Yeah, that's the thing.
If this is task analysis, show me an example of task analysis where you're not talking about the task with the solution. Yeah. Right. So that's one thing. But there's this belief that they've already done this. So I think there's a been there, done that effect that people have as well too. I also think that there's they haven't practiced it themselves. And I'll tell you, in my workshops, some of the people that get the rules of grammar wrong the quickest are designers, right? So I'll say, listen to that interview and write a job step. And guess what? They say, send email. It's like, no, you can't say email. Oh, that's what you mean by solution agnostic. So they've not actually practiced it themselves. So they understand the theory, and they understand the theory really well and really quickly because they're so experienced. But then when they go to do it, they're like, oh, that's what you meant, right? So I think there's a gap in the actual application of Jobs to be Done because they've never done it. That is there as well too. But I think there's a been there, done that. I think there's a lack of actual experience there. As well too, but I also don't think I think they've Googled it and read one or two things and said, yeah, I got that, and they kind of shoebox it, Jobs to be Done, into it's switch interviews or it's just ODI or whatever, and this actually helps people with strategy work, like Christensen used to do corporate strategy, but it can also have a product manager and marketing people and all the techniques in my book and stuff like that, and seeing it as a much broader landscape than it actually is. I think there's a lack of awareness there, but ultimately, I don't know, Jonathan.
Yeah, but I seen this effect very, very often. So you have this kind of I mean, and I never really understood why it's so bad if something is old, to be honest. I mean, if somebody tells me, well, yeah, but that sounds like, I don't know. We still quote the Ted Levitt quote, which is from the 50s or so. I mean, that's
something like that. Yeah.
And which is
the whole, right.
The 30s. So it was
for the 30s,
right,
even.
exactly.
So,
right. Yeah. Right.
100, but I know mine. I mean, like if the thought probably has been around,
of course,
way longer. We could go
right.
deep into this. I mean, if you look into philosophy, I'm 100% sure you will find the thought in there. But so I've never understood why newness of something has.
I agree, and if you look at the fields that they compare, task analysis, like, yeah, but that has its history in something. You didn't invent that either.
Exactly.
That has its history in something else. That's a little bit of a so there kind of response to it as well too. But when I first learned about Jobs-to-be-Done, it was very obvious to me. And like we were saying before, sometimes being obvious is a good thing, right? Because you can then leverage it better. But the big difference, I think, for me is a historical one, is the fact that Jobs-to-be-Done came from the business community. Right. And that helped me have different levels and types of conversations with my stakeholders. Again, Jobs-to-be-Done as a collaboration tool, right? Because there's this impression that, design and design thinking is going to be fluff. And, there's that team over there that has magic pixie dust that does stuff that makes a great user experience. It's not magic pixie dust, but there's that belief over there. Yeah. And then they're going to do a design thinking workshop, and then we're going to pull out our pipe cleaners and do something fluffy with it for a while. Right.
Yeah.
And but there's actually meat behind what you're doing there, right? It's trying to be customer centric. I could take that same group of stakeholders and do a Jobs-to-be-Done workshop with them. It's going to have a completely different effect because of what Jobs-to-be-Done is and has been historically. So for me, as a UX guy, I'm like, this is amazing because I need as many tools in my toolkit as possible to be able to move forward in it's obvious. Why would I reject it? It has this great history and this great power behind it. Why would I not integrate that in my tool set?
And by the way, so this is kind of an experience that we have had over the past, some 10 years or so. We started kind of at the strategy, very high up business people with Jobs-to-be-Done. It immediately clicked, and more we're kind of going into the UX. But what it helps them is also get a seat at the more strategic table.
Yeah.
So Jobs-to-be-Done is something that if you do it well, it really it can empower UX teams to have a seat at the table because very often they're just. In brackets, but they're just researchers or just make something a little bit look more beautiful. But with the Jobs-to-be-Done framework and the language, suddenly they sit in the boardroom. Sometimes even in the boardroom, to be honest. But they sit in higher up boards and they talk the same language, and they talk a language which is business oriented, and that empowers them. So it can have that empowering effect.
I agree. And that was my attraction to Jobs-to-be-Done. I wanted to see the table. I wanted to have more impact. I wanted the customer, there's that word again, the human perspective, to have more of a piece of the pie of the decision-making process.
Yeah.
And if Jobs-to-be-Done can help do that, why not embrace it?
Yeah. Exactly.
Is there anything that you wish Jobs-to-be-Done could do better? If we were gonna, how could it, is there anything we try to do with it where it's not the right application?
That's a really good question. I still think there are problems to be sorted out. One of the stumbling blocks that I perceive from a lot of questions and coaching work that I do is around scoping the Jobs-to-be-Done landscape, because they're in very, very complex B2B situations, and they're like, and then they say, and then they hear things like create a job map for a job performer. They're like, I got 24 people and there's 100 jobs that are in front of me. And they feel that Jobs-to-be-Done isn't robust enough to work across very complex spaces and solutions. And I think that one of the power of Jobs-to-be-Done is that it is very focused, and it does kind of try to cut through the noise there. But it does so in a way that I think people feel like they're missing a lot of things. And I've heard that a critique of Jobs-to-be-Done is like, yeah, but you guys are missing all this other stuff. So that's one thing. And then, I also think there are some other things that I think the Jobs-to-be-Done field, let's just put it that way, could be doing better. in terms of clarity around perspectives and things like that. I mean, that's just, nobody owns that, but I mean, that's what I was trying to do. It's just bring clarity to the field as well.
What about like with product development, at least when you make tangible things, like you've got your base there behind you, ultimately a product has to look like something. Like
yes.
we just pick on your base for a second. It's a certain color. I assume a lot of the shape is functionally, but there's certainly some style aspects. How do we determine what something should look like?
Yeah. I mean, that's, yeah. Well, so back to your question, Scott, too. I think better tying the jobs to be done outputs or results, or what others will consume to solutions, and that's a big gap. I've experienced that before, where you do even a very quantitative, rigorous analysis, and then people go, "Okay, great, what should I do?" Because none of that's going to tell you how the base should look, right? I think what Jobs to be Done is helps you focus on a direction. Within that, though, you still need frameworks like Lean Startup. I'm just going to throw that out there. Build, measure, learn. How do I know what it should look like? I need to build something and go out and get feedback on that thing. So there's a feedback loop on the solution side of things that you still need. And what I'm trying to position Jobs to be Done is as a complementary framework. Right? It doesn't mean you don't do design thinking or UX. It doesn't mean that you don't do lean. It doesn't mean that you don't do agile. It can actually help those things and fuel those things. Because guess what? If I go into an ideation session in design thinking, I have a much more focused and constrained input. If I'm going into some lean, build, measure, learn, validation testing, I have a much more constrained hypothesis as well too. My sprints can be planned better because I know what to prioritize for the next quarter. Right. So it really helps these disciplines that have their own deficiencies. Design thinking has a huge deficiency in what are we going to brainstorm around. I can't find anybody in the design thinking community to tell me, how do you prioritize the insight that you get out of the research? Yeah. Right. So there's this super bias of the researcher that goes into design thinking. And that's why I believe stakeholders feel it's fluffy. Yeah. Because the researcher will come in and say, we're going to brainstorm around this thing. It's like, why that thing? And Jobs to be Done, why that thing? Here's why, because we did the quantitative and the qualitative, and we had the workshop, and we did the grading exercise, Jim's grading exercise, and we did the survey. That's why you should focus on this thing. There's still no guarantee, but that's why you should focus on it.
No, I mean, I totally agree with this. I think all these agile, lean approaches, iterative approaches generally. You hear a lot of people who say, okay, well, I just throw something out and then I'll iterate. Yeah. But, this is not how the scientific process works. And these iterative approaches want to be called scientific somehow. And this is just not how it works. You need to have a hypothesis. You need to start from somewhere and you need to test it. And I think Jobs to be Done gives you the hypothesis somehow. It'll give you constraints on what you should be looking at and looking for. Correct. And I think that's the power.
I've actually heard leaders in the lean field. I was at a conference once in particular that I remember. It was a well-known name from lean. I'm not going to say who it was. And he started his presentation with, your first step is always going to be wrong. You have no idea where to start. Just start with something. And I wanted to go, wait, we can at least, we do have an idea on where to start. But it was literally just throw spaghetti on the wall and see what sticks. That was the first assumption to his approach of lean. And then he went into build, measure, learn, and blah, blah, blah. It was a great presentation. But I was like, I disagree with your premise. I believe we can get closer to what you should be. It's not even just having a hypothesis, because I can come up with a hypothesis right now. It's the nature and the area, the arena that your hypothesis is working within is more on target than it could be if you just throw spaghetti at them.
Yeah. I mean, people often just, say there's two versions. There's either you do waterfall or you do an iterative approach. And I think there's ways to, mix those two approaches together. And I think you get something much more powerful then.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think it's a good thing that you mentioned the waterfall, because there are also some industries, especially in whatever is medical or pharma and so on. You can't go out and throw something at patients and iterate. You can't go to, you will never get approval for something. Well, I have a hunch, let's put in a couple of millions to get FDA approval. I mean, That's just not how that industry works.
and it's a great observation, because a lot of the literature on lean startup assumes software development, which is very, very different. And very often, if you listen to their examples, it's, we were a startup and we wanted to launch an app, right?
Yeah.
And like, I work with like IBM and stuff, like they have like $10 million projects of data migration of one bank's data to another and stuff like that. It's like, that's not an app. You're not going to build, measure, learn on a $10 million project of that scale. There's 200 people working for 5 years on this project. Where's the build, measure, learn there? You know? So yes, you're right. Not everybody is creating apps as a startup, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So sorry, Scott, I think you wanted to.
I was going to say, yeah, I'm from the tractor business. You don't build a minimum viable product of a tractor. It just, it's nonsensical. Right. It's funny though. I can't help but reflect the build, measure, learn. We talked about ideas based on older ideas. I mean, that's based on the PDCA cycle.
Sure.
Which is based on who knows what, which is based on who knows what. I totally agree that, you know, it's, what's the big deal about something being new?
I don't know. There's nothing new.
Yeah.
Like nothing. Ideas come from other ideas.
Right.
You can go trace it back to Aristotle probably, or something like that, you know.
We can. I'm 100% sure. I have a philosophy.
I agree.
That's what I will.
Yeah, I wasn't just saying that. Yeah, I wasn't.
If you want me to do it, I don't know if you did that intentionally. Did you mention his name intentionally?
No. I was just playing that out in my mind. If you go back and you go back and you go back and you go back, right? You're at the ancient Greeks, right?
So I'm not going to do it, but you're 100% right. Who you should be tracing it back to is Aristotle. I'm not going to bore you all to death, but you should read him. You should read him about his 4 causes. If you do, he distinguishes 4 kinds of causes. Read the Wikipedia article. You will immediately see what I mean. So Jobs-to-be-Done is 2,500 years old.
Right. Exactly. Right. Yeah. Right. Exactly. Right. Yeah. Right.
That caveman. Ugh.
Right. Exactly. Right.
Good ideas. I think Aristotle ripped them off.
Caveman jobs. Yeah, but why does that matter? It doesn't matter. I mean, it's not like we're the first man on the moon and you have your flag there and you reach the top of the mountain before anybody else. I don't care.
But I would also say there's something to be said about focus, because I think, you know, even if things have been said time and time again, if you have a field that says all sorts of different things and somehow doesn't focus, and this is kind of my feeling with design somehow. Everything in Jobs-to-be-Done has been said in design at some point somewhere, for sure. But design has said all sorts of things. And I feel that Jobs-to-be-Done is a kind of a one-trick pony in a way. That's what it does. It's the front end of innovation. It does that really well, and it doesn't try to do anything else, basically. And I think that's a very important aspect of it.
Yeah. I mean, it's really laser focused, but it's. So I just want to add a few things and then ask you a couple of questions. So I think what is really true is, I mean, it doesn't solve you a lot of. I mean, even the technical problems around building the solution down the road, Jobs-to-be-Done has nothing to say about that, and it shouldn't even try to do. But also very often, I think companies are in teams that are developing something are not in this position of either we have an idea and we're going to go and solutionize, or we have no clue at all and we want to know, but they're somewhere in the middle. They kind of have a general idea. They maybe even had something like a prototype, and then at one point, suddenly they become uncertain. Like they're started to build something, and then they're thinking, "Oh my God, are we on the right track? Do we?" Right. And their Jobs-to-be-Done can really, really help you. Just you don't need the laid out map where you need to go, but it gives you a general direction. I mean, it's rather than here and not over there, and that can be immensely valuable. Yeah, I mean, you'll lose so much time iterating around.
Agree. Yeah, I like the quote from Mike Tyson, the famous boxer, and he used to say, or he said once. Everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face. And I think sometimes that's what happens. And that's what lean is trying to prevent, right? If you go into, you have an idea what a solution is, and then it's like, oh, that's not what we imagined. That's not what was on the napkin that we drew before, because it never is. There's always compromise and change that goes along the way. And then you give it to, customers and users, and they barf all over it. And then you're like, ooh, maybe we were on the right, so our great strategy, because you do a strategy session or ideation session, and you come out with a sticky note, and we're going to save the company with this. Like, you really feel like that, right? But then there's all of these compromises and iterations of things that have to happen. And that idea wasn't fleshed out either, and all of those things, right? And then you get punched in the face and you're like, oh, we need a new strategy, but it's already going. And then you get disillusionment in the team and things. That's like every project in the world, because where you start is never where you end, right? Yeah. And it's how do you harmonize that beginning and end gap that's always going to have happen? I think Jobs-to-be-Done, you need confidence. Teams need confidence as well too, that they're to take the first step. And that's where the focus, I think, comes in, Jonathan, right? Is that we're going into the next quarter with these sprints and these features prioritized because we believe these are going to address the customer solution. And then if you have to pivot, you can still orient yourself towards that and say, well, that didn't work, but we found another. Can you find another way to get that job done, right? Mm-hmm. So it kind of, it's a guiding light, hopefully, that helps people in that state of disillusionment that Jan was talking about.
I so agree. I mean, and no, because it's really, I mean, you mentioned this confidence, and that is so important, because what also can happen is you are in a project, you get a little bit of uncertainty, and then you will just start running around in circles because you're uncertain. And then having the confidence to act, to taking really a decision, okay, we move to the next step, because we know the general direction is right. Yeah. Their Jobs-to-be-Done can immensely help.
Agree. Yeah. And, being in the design role, designers are very often on the front lines in terms of that getting punched in the face. And I've seen that so many times in my career, where you get handed some requirements and, hey, we're going to do this big initiative, or any initiative really. And you kind of suspect it might not turn out the way that you're supposed to. And then you're on the front lines, the first person getting feedback on that thing. And you're like, we did this wrong. And by then it's hard, by then it's almost too late if you're a UX designer and you know that you're in the middle of an effort and it's wrong. So the thing that I liked about Jobs-to-be-Done, particularly when I was in design roles, is it helped me have that conversation earlier, right? Yeah. So that I avoided getting in that situation. So for me, Jobs-to-be-Done, was personally and career-wise, it was something that helped me and I was attracted to because of that effect, to be able to have those types of conversations and not wait until you're 6 months into the project.
Yeah, exactly. I want to get back a little bit to something that I think which was really important, but we kind of went over it because probably we're all too much into Jobs-to-be-Done anyway. But you mentioned this kind of gap between, people get the quote, but then applying it themselves is really then it falls apart somehow. I think that is an experience a lot of people make. They read some of the books or some of the things, and then when they actually have to sit down and make it yourself, that's when you struggle. I want to kind of get a little bit into this. What do you think are the most common misconceptions or the key things that they need to get right to start?
I think there's two things. One is just not using any solution-based language, and there are exceptions, by the way. So I say no, in my workshops and so you can't reference any solution, but I actually have been in situations where it makes sense to actually at least hint at something, maybe not directly, not like a brand name, but I could say that in a way where there's no solution, but it's so abstract that it's not going to mean anything to anybody else. And then you allow it. But the rule there is no solutions means no solutions. And I've seen people get that wrong. And again, it's not that they get it wrong, because that's easy to comprehend. But then when you actually have to do it, you have to think about, well, how do I express sending an email without writing send an email? And that takes a little bit of practice. The other big thing that I was confused with Jobs-to-be-Done around, it took me a while to figure it out, is separating the functional job from the outcome. That there's a job step, which is separate from an outcome, right? There's the getting from point A to point B. That's the target job, and then the steps in the target job. And then there's outcomes. How well do I measure getting that job done as an outcome? And it took me a while to sort those things out, because are outcomes Jobs-to-be-Done? Because of the label Jobs-to-be-Done, because you call the job step a job, but you don't call the outcome a job, but it's within the Jobs-to-be-Done framework. It took me a while to figure out those are two separate things. So when I teach, I really make that point that it's not find cheap airfares quickly. It's find airfares and minimize the costs and reduce the time it takes me. Those are three different things. Find cheap airfares quickly are three separate things in Jobs-to-be-Done. Right. Yeah. It took me a while to figure that out, because find cheap airfares quickly sounds like a perfect goal. Right.
Exactly.
UX, that's how any other field in design thinking. We want to help people find cheap airfares quickly, and Jobs-to-be-Done comes in there and separates it a little bit even further. And that's the thing that I think, unless you've experienced that with real data and trying to do that on your own, they're like, oh, Jobs-to-be-Done is different because we don't do that in those other fields.
Yeah. I often... oh, sorry, go on, John.
No, I was just going to say, in that respect, I think Scott's book is really good with his idea of the perfectors. I think that really brings the point home. So I encourage everyone to look into that.
I think you should say a little bit more about that, because or people should just read the book. I mean, both.
I want to respond to what Jim said first. I think that is a perfect example of a very practical usefulness in a conversation with anybody who might not understand the value of Jobs-to-be-Done. I already forgot your example, but
find cheap airfares quickly. That's the one I use. I use that all the time.
That's a very nice melody. It has a nice rhythm to it.
You know, when I'm working with clients, I say, I'll just sort of begin very high level. What's the goal of this project? And they will say something very similar like that. We want the this. And so Jobs-to-be-Done is, I guess I'm gonna have to steal you like seeing other people steal your slides. I might have to steal that example.
Okay, go ahead.
But it perfectly illustrates how the language is used to pull these. And if somebody's listening to this, there's a few themes. Language is a huge theme. Totally. And getting precise with our words so that we are communicating very clearly, and that whatever this information we have from our customer, that we understand. And then another theme has been communicating. It's not just about gathering, but using and communicating. And it sounds like, Jan, with your spin method, you guys go deep into that. And you've mentioned, and Jim, you've mentioned quite a few times about things being visual and helping to communicate it visually. So I think that's a perfect example. But I mean, the perfectus is almost something that doesn't exist, right? It's saying that there's this job. Well, it came from a quote Tony Owick said. His quote was, "The goal of outcome-driven innovation is to help a customer to accomplish a job perfectly." Right. And you just hear somebody say something, and it's just like, "Wow, that's such a big deal. I don't know what to do with it. I can write it down. I can read it, meditate on it." But you know, one of the things I think that as Jobs-to-be-Done practitioners, well, at least us four anyway, I think if there was something better, I think we would have gone to it by now. I think there's and Jim, I think something that's really cool about the community you've put together, having attended a few of those sessions, it's everybody just wants to understand it better, and there's no defensive-ness about this idea or that idea. It's very much like we just want there's something, and I don't know. Jonathan, you asked the question, you know, what makes some folks gravitate to Jobs-to-be-Done so quickly and some just sort of dismissive of it, but maybe it's just sort of luck. But it seems like the folks that really gravitate toward Jobs-to-be-Done there's almost, I don't know if it's a personality trait, but it's like want to improve and want to understand this as best as they can, which is why they're not defensive, which is why they invite, hey, like one of the questions we asked you, Jim, was, you know, what's wrong with it? How can we improve on it? Right. We sort of want to learn that answer, but once again, this isn't a great question. It's just more of an observation I like to do sometimes. But if I have to say, if I go back to Tony Owick's book, 2005, What Customers Want, I mean, I have tried to poke holes in that thing for 17 years. And my view today is, you know, could be very well summarized by that book from 2005.
It's he got the perfect job to be done with that book, so he reached the perfectives with the book.
But the thing is, it's used at the end of the day, because we also talked about you know, the different level of rigor for a project. At the end of the day, are you better than you were before?
Agree.
Or is this something useful that's helping you? That should be the real threshold. this process going to?
I agree.
Yeah.
And I'm not a Jobs-to-be-Done consultant. Like I literally have a day job, right? And I like to go and talk about Jobs-to-be-Done and run workshops, and I do a little bit of coaching and things like that. But I have no territory or trademark or brand or product or offering that I'm trying to defend. And one of my first questions when I do a little bit of coaching work, I don't do much. I don't even say consulting. It's just I talk to people. I say, why do you need jobs to be done? Why do you think you need jobs to be done? Because maybe that's the wrong framework for you.
Yeah.
So I'll even tell people, don't use you're beyond it, or you're doing something different, or you need something else. So it can be helpful, and it's out there, and folks like us are attracted to it. So why not at least find out what it's all about and how it can help you, if it can help you.
By the way, I find Mural to be an excellent tool for scoping projects.
There you go.
How do you use Jobs to be Done within Mural?
But yeah, that's a good question. In several very, very light ways, and very kind of in the background. It's not like we stop and we say we're gonna do a Jobs to be Done project. But our head of product has a nice article. It's actually a case study in my book where there was a job map, and it's pretty much the same one we've had, and using that to prioritize the backlog, which then ladders down into job stories, right? So once you, it's kind of this big funnel that ladders up to the core job that aligns us here. But I've also, I mentioned that workshop where I had a job map, and we walked through it, and I had to explain to the stakeholder, this isn't a customer journey map. It's not about coming to our product. And there's just the pause and I've never thought about that before. And then the grading exercise. So by the way, I've done that with the same job map with two different groups, and we came out with the same spots, with the same two spots where we needed to prioritize. So not rigor, but just more evidence that those conversations were probably more than just gut reactions that, were informed to some degree by our presence here in the market that we're in as well too. And recently too, not that recently, but I pulled out a job map to do a brainstorming session actually. Because we deal a lot with collaboration and workshops and meetings. And a lot of folks are talking about hybrid collaboration right now, hybrid work, right? Some folks are in the office, some folks are remote. So I looked at one of the main job map that I've been using for a while, which is essentially running a session at work, right? Collaborating at work. And there's a before, during, and after to that. And I said, and I put the lens on it, and I said, okay, if these are the steps that people go through, what are the pain points that they have in a hybrid context? So instead of grading, I then put a scenario around it and said, look at that job map through the lens of hybrid, and what are all the pain points? And that became a blog post. I have a blog post out there. Here are the biggest pain points in hybrid collaboration that we gathered, because I had a team of like 12 people looking at all the pain points there.
Yeah.
So very lightweight ways of using it.
Yeah, but you can immediately see the power. I mean, the way you framed it, what was it to do a workshop? What was the job for did you mention to do a session at work, or to?
Yeah, the main target job that we solve here at Mural is around collaboration, and I've framed it in different ways, like run a collaborative session with a team, or solve problems together as a team, and how that works. And it's basically going to revolve around a session of some kind. I'm avoiding the word meeting or workshop, but something like that. Yeah.
I mean, the beauty of it, there can be a pandemic happening all around it, but that thing stays the same.
It stays the same.
And that's one of the beauties of Jobs.
Well, it was 5 years old. The brainstorming session that I talked about.
Exactly.
I pulled it off the shelf. It was 5 years old. I changed some of the words only because it was taste. Like why did I use that word 5 years ago?
Yeah.
Right? But I didn't really change anything.
But the general structure that will remain, and
well, guess what? Anytime you're having a meeting, you have to determine who to invite, determine when to meet, determine how you're going to meet, determine the topic that you're going to discuss. And then you kick off and you have to do orientation, and then you get into and then you conclude. And then afterwards there's a follow, that's what a meeting is, or a workshop, or a session, or whatever it is, right? It does not going to change.
Yeah. Very nice. So I don't know. How do you feel? Do we have some energy left? What are your gut feelings?
I have energy. How long is your podcast?
Well, we haven't yet figured it out. Maybe we're going to cut it into 2 or so.
going to be a long podcast.
I've got a quick question. Just people ask me the same question. Why did you write the book? What made you just say, I want to spend lots of time capturing all this down? What was that motivation?
Yeah, it's a good question. Similar reasons why I wrote my previous book on mapping experiences. And I think it was that I felt I had enough experience. It's a practical experience. I don't like writing about things that I haven't actually done. Mm-hmm. And I also felt I had enough clarity in both my own understanding and some of the realizations that I came to, very often by having made mistakes, that coupled with the practicing how to describe jobs to be done folks. I had done, prior to writing the book, 4 or 5 years of a workshop that I was, trying to work out. How do you break the explanation of jobs to be done down in a way that's clear and aligns with my perspective? So I had kind of workshopped, kind of like a comedian will workshop their materials beforehand. Like I kind of workshopped what in my mind, at least, what it was, or what a clear explanation of jobs to be done might be, right? And like I said, if I went back, I'd probably make things even clearer. But and then it was basically just sharing my mistakes and my learnings with the world. I mean, obviously, there's a little bit of money in royalties, but it was also after you write a book, then there's, being on podcasts and webinars and workshops and things like that. So I just kind of wanted to put that stake in the ground to say, here's what I've learned. Here are the mistakes that I've made. Don't make those same mistakes, and come join the conversation.
Yeah. And I really liked the book. I think if it's really something you can take off the shelf and start working, more or less. Of course, you have to read through the chapters, but I really like this emphasis on, as you say, it comes from practical experience. Right, yeah. And if you read the book, I think that is you'll feel it, you'll see it, that it is there, because it's easy to write a blog post based on, well, I have a general idea of what jobs to be done is, and I think if you're a practitioner and you read such an abstract blog, you will immediately know,
right,
who has done it and who hasn't, like who ran into which problems.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. And I think it very comes through in your book, where kind of what are the challenges, and you hint people and point people to how they can overcome it, and how
where they can get started. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's what I say.
Democratizing jobs to be done.
Maybe. And I felt, I didn't want to dumb it down though. Like I didn't want to do a jobs to be done for dummies and stuff like that. And I worried about that, actually. I worried about, kind of watering down jobs to be done. I even said that to Tony. I had a call with him. He reviewed the book in advance. And I thought he was going to hate it, because it just waters down all that great work, as Scott pointed out, and I was like, oh, he's just going to hate it. He didn't hate it. I actually don't know how much he liked it, but he didn't hate it. So I succeeded in that. And I spoke with Bob Mesta about it too, and lots of other folks in the field. And they said, no, this is good. You got something there. So I had a little bit of that insight going into it.
Yeah.
What's the next book going to be about?
I don't know. It's funny because when you write a book, then people volunteer you to write other books. But if you've ever written a book, you swear off writing books. You're like, I'm never doing that again. It's like pulling teeth. I don't like to write. That's the weird thing. Like, I'm not like, it's not necessarily like fun. There's something cathartic about it, and you get your thoughts on paper, right? And it's a process.
Yeah. And you're a teacher. You're a natural teacher.
Yeah, I think it's more the education, right? The actual The problem with writing a book is you have to write a book. Like you have to write. You have to sit down and form sentences. It's not about knowledge, because everybody in the world has knowledge enough in their head to write 4 books. But you got to have the wherewithal to sit down, and every Saturday and get up. I get up in the morning because that's when I write the best. I get up 6, 7 in the morning every day and write for a couple hours before your full day of work. Like the wherewithal to do that is pretty tough. I mean, it's tough to write a book. I found. I don't know about you, Scott, but
well, your practical experience and you're really as a natural teacher, that really comes through. Okay. And so I certainly appreciate you putting it out there. It's definitely a reference I just can't recommend highly enough.
Thanks for that.
Can we maybe have a little bit of a glimpse into? I mean, we've talked about this worry of and how where do you see jobs to be done going? The theory itself. I mean, one thing is, it will. I think it will keep spreading, but where do you see it going in general?
That's a good question. I mean, I think, and I hope, I guess I hope that it'll become commonplace and a default way of thinking about things. To some degree, design thinking has achieved that in certain fields and organizations as well too. Is like, of course, we're going to talk to our customers or create a persona or some kind of map, like journey maps and things like that. And I hope it just becomes kind of a default, that people internalize it, and it becomes just a default way of thinking about things. So you have a set of requirements before an agile sprint. Somebody needs to raise their hand and say, yeah, but what's the job to be done here? Right. And my hope is that just kind of becomes a natural instinct for folks to be asking that question, that perspective shift, that they say, oh, we don't have any budget and no resources and very tight deadline and a lot of requirements and things to work through if you're on a product team. And then somebody says, yeah, but what's the job here? And everybody goes, oh yeah, let's think about that. And they naturally say, oh yeah, we want to get that done before we move forward. And it just becomes part of work. And I use product teams a lot as an analogy. It could be a marketing team, could even be strategy. What company are we going to acquire next? Well, I don't know. What job does that customer get, or does that company get done? And how does that fit into the jobs that we get done? Like, that's just the way that businesses think.
Yeah. I think I've seen it. You started it probably. I'm not sure, but now I've gotten attentive to it as well. You posted here and there like job announcements. So where a company, I think Microsoft, I don't know what the company exactly was, but in there somewhere they mentioned jobs. And I think that's one of those tiny but great signs that something is happening.
Agree. Well, and that's why I did it too. So all of those people pinged me. Like, I know some folks in the field, either from my workshops or just knowing around, who use jobs to be done. And what, a couple of people who are case studies in my book. And in one case, they pinged me and they said, this job, this description, although it didn't really say it in there, he said, we want somebody who knows a lot about jobs to be done. Do you know anybody? That was the request. Okay. So I got pinged on LinkedIn. Do you know anybody? And I said, no, but I'll post it for you.
Okay.
And then I did that again just recently. Same thing happened. Do you know anybody for this role? We want them to be very, very fluent in jobs to be done. And I said, no, but I'll post it for you. And it started adding up in my mind that it's a future skill, I think, that will be expected more and more from product managers, from designers, from marketing folks, even entrepreneurs. I think it's going to be expected that you're able to speak in that language, right? Yeah. Can you talk about customer journeys and personas? Can you talk about build, measure, learn? Do you understand how lean and agile work? Do you understand jobs to be done? I think if you're going into a job interview or you're creating your resume and you're not fluent in that ability, I think it's going to be increasingly a deficiency that people are going to be expecting that.
Yeah. I hope really this is something that's going to happen, and it's just becoming a standard. And what we also need for that is kind of the more of university people and academia in general. They kind of pick it up. I've seen it here and there in some of the business schools. Yeah. But honestly, there I worry about watering down. But that's whole different topic.
I've had since you were talking about people who attend my classes. There is another group of people, and there have been a couple folks from academia who've latched onto my book and Jobs to be Done Untangled and things like that. James from, I forget James' last name right now, from the University of Binghamton here in New York. He's at the Jobs to be Done Untangled. I'll point him out next time. But he's been bringing it back to his innovation courses at the university there. And then other folks from that university have pinged me. In fact, I'm doing a talk there coming up soon as well too. And others have been looking at it as a framework, as a way to teach innovation, to teach human centricity and things like that.
Well, I mean, the first time I heard about Jobs to be Done was actually going through Alex Osterwalder, fellow Swiss person, wrote the business model canvas, etc. And in his value proposition, it's not called Canvas. What is it? It's the anyway.
It is value proposition.
It is
Canvas, yeah.
Value proposition Canvas. Well, he talks about the jobs to be done, and he doesn't really go into it. And I was very curious, and I explored it through there. But he actually has a background in academics. I mean, so he definitely has that background. So I don't know where he got it from, but definitely.
I think he knows Tony Alwick and
he wrote the intro to Tony's last book, didn't he? The foreword
I think he did.
in Tony's book is from Alexander Osterwalder, I believe.
Is it?
Yeah,
I believe so.
If I'm not mistaken, I think they know. I mean, they know each other. I've also seen them in other events and such.
Right.
He cited Tony in the Business Model Canvas book.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Right. Yeah, no, he did. So the Jobs to be Done, Theory to Practice, Tony Olwick, Alexander Osterwalder wrote the foreword. So there's a connection there. I think he latched onto it like a lot of other folks and said, yeah, that's a thing, and then integrated it into his thinking in a unique way. And that's one of the plays I have in the playbook, by the way. I talk about the value proposition canvas. I got permission to reprint it and stuff like that from Strategizer. And I say, but if you think about it, the touch point to Jobs to be Done is so minimal. It's just that one little field that says Jobs to be Done, but that's where you start.
Yeah.
He even says, start over there on the right. And it's like, okay, if you can put a little bit of rigor into what you're going to put into that field, right? So you do your Jobs to be Done research, then you prioritize either with a job map or prioritize outcome statements. Now you're not just guessing. Now you can put something in there and say, yep, we did the homework to be able to put that thing in that box. And then you go to the pains and gains and over to the solution side as well too. So it's just this little touch point, but that's the type of thinking that I hope Jobs to be Done becomes, that people say value proposition, part of the value proposition has to be what's the job to be done. Sprint planning for agile, epic planning, where's the jobs to be done in there, right? Marketing campaign, where's the jobs to be done in there? And it's that type of thinking. That's why I was so attracted to that.
Yeah, I think, but then there's I think work from the Jobs to be Done community to be done, really to start connecting and showing how actually all these things connect. I think you're doing a great job at it, but I think that also is something which attracted me, I think, to you and to your book, where you really, you are starting to build these connections and these bridges to all of the other methods. And I think we shouldn't, sometimes there is a hesitancy to do this because we feel, I don't know, we have this beautiful thing, Jobs to be Done, and we keep it to ourselves and we know everything about it. But maybe we just open the door a little bit and start making these connections, because that's how you're gonna. But that's how you're going to implement it.
Does that water it down though? Is that going to water the field down so that everybody's just walking around saying jobs to be done? Kind of like in UX and design thinking, everybody thinks they're customer centric or UX designer because they did a persona and a journey map, and then the field gets watered down.
Yeah, well, I don't know. Yes and no. I think if you're somebody like Jonathan who sees that, I don't know, the third of the canvas and asks himself, what the hell is this? I want to know more. Then if we can incite this, we're good. But I also sometimes get the reaction where when I speak to somebody and I mention jobs to be done, they say, oh yeah, we're doing that. And what they mean is they put a sticky note somewhere.
They put a sticky note in there. And you know what they put in there? They put in there, find cheap airfares quickly. That's what they put in there. And you're like, no, that's three different things. And you don't know if any of those are the top unmet need. But they put find cheap airfares quickly in the value proposition canvas and then go on. Is that a good thing or a bad thing if they do that?
I think it's a bad thing myself, but I'll just be very clear on that.
Okay. Jan, let's go around.
Okay, fair enough. No, me too. It depends. It depends on where you stand.
Well, what about you, Scott?
Started with it. Come on.
100%. If I think that's a bad thing, you got to pull up.
Bad thing. I agree.
We should kind of have the door open so that they can evolve as well and take the next step.
I potentially set people up to do that because I show the value proposition canvas in my book. And if they don't get it or internalize the other parts of my book, they might just write find cheap airfare quickly in that value proposition canvas. So now I'm guilty. And you guys agree with me that it's a bad thing.
Yeah. No, I think for me, we were talking about this before. I think definitions, and I've gotten tons of pushback on this, but I think definitions are important, especially when we're talking about concepts that are already, no one really has a very good grasp on, like, what is a need, what is a goal, what is wants. People talk about wants also. I mean, all these things are very fuzzy concepts, and I think the more we can get agreement on what these things are, I mean, the better it is. And that was one of the things that really attracted me from the very start of Tony Olwick's book, when he says basically there's no consensus on what a need is. And I was like, it's exactly what I have noticed. And it drove me nuts. And I was like, finally, someone's actually acknowledging this problem, because no one was even acknowledging the problem. And that's where I personally, one of the stages where I got really hooked on it. I thought, okay, I'm with the people that we all kind of understand each other here. So that's my kind of pet peeve is these when people have, talk past each other because they just don't have the same definitions of things.
Right. Agreed.
Yeah. But it's not pure. I mean, one part, yes, is the definitions, but I think it's also, I mean, this beautiful example of, you could say it better, the cheap, fast tickets.
Find cheap airfares quickly.
Yeah, exactly. I have to kind of internalize this. I mean, the beauty of clear definitions is it's not about the purity of the definition, but it's about now we all speak about the same thing and we know what we actually have to improve upon. Right. Yeah. I mean, if you have that whole sentence and there's 7 criteria in there and we all agree, okay, this is a big need in the market. Okay, still you don't know what you
still don't know. That's right.
Which of the 7 things are there? Which, I mean, and everybody will have an opinion which of the 7 things matter. So that's the beauty and the power of having clarity.
I agree.
Really having this.
Well, that's where the focus comes from. I think
that's where the focus comes in.
The focus comes from the precision. That's what Jobs-to-be-Done always provided for me, was more precision than other fields in sorting out, find cheap airfares quickly. Because, how do you know it's cheap? How do you know it's quick? How do you know why are you placing that in that sentence? Because by doing that, you're placing your bet on those things, but you've missed the 50 other things that the customers might really be prioritizing. And what comes before and after finding airfares and all those other questions? It allows you to be a lot more precise rather than just walking to a brainstorming session and say, how might we help people find cheap airfares quickly? And then the ideas go like this,
Because and that's a beautiful thing. Oh, sorry, go on, Jonathan.
Yeah, no, just to bounce off what you were saying before, earlier in the discussion, Jim, you were saying that at the beginning you have found it difficult also to separate what was an outcome and what was a job. And I think actually to go back a bit or specify a bit what I said, I think beyond just having very good definitions, because I think actually sometimes some of these things you just cannot define very well, but at least parsing the things correctly. This comes from computer science, this idea of distinguishing what are things of different kind. Correct. So in your sentence, you're talking about, okay, this is something you can call it a job. It's of different nature to this other thing. In the end, it doesn't even really matter if you have a very good definition, but to be able to at least say these 2 things are not of the same kind. And
why they're different. Yeah, what the differences are. Right. Yeah, agree. Agree.
Yeah. And there was this aspect that you mentioned, because it taking that whole big problem that nobody really clearly has an understanding about, and then going on creating ideas. I'm sorry to say, but that's easy and comes very cheap. Having a lot of ideas. You can do. You can sit down, do a workshop.
I got ideas. You want ideas?
Ideas is not the issue. Right here, the problem is not creating ideas. Yeah.
And ideas have no value either. Ideas don't have the value.
I think it was last week or so. I read this mapping experience, and you use pretty harsh language there, where you really say, okay, an idea, nice, but who cares?
Ideas are overrated. Yeah, I have this article out there called "Ideas Are Overrated." But I'm in the idea business actually, and I've run lots of workshops where part of the goal was to come up with ideas. So I'm guilty of doing that in the past. That's why I know that generating ideas are easy. I can get a group of people and I'll give you 150 ideas from that group. I know how to do that. Yeah. Are they focused on the right thing that they should focus on?
Yeah.
Right. I don't know. What's the rationale by which you prioritize those ideas? I don't know. Well, with Jobs-to-be-Done, I can tell you how you do that. Right. Yeah. Is the input, an unmet need? And then when you're evaluating them, how well do they stack up against the job, the unmet needs, and things like that? Otherwise, it's fuzzy input, and even fuzzier, fuzzy input squared is just an even fuzzier output, right?
Yeah, fuzzy input squared.
Yeah, fuzzy output squared.
Yeah, exactly, fuzzy output squared. But that's a lot. We do that. I did that a lot.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Jim, for the great conversation. If people want to know more, where can they find more about you and your work, and how can they reach you?
Yeah, I think one of the best things to do is head on over to the Jobs-to-be-Done Toolkit, JTBD and we have some live events there. Jobs-to-be-Done Untangled is a community call. You can jump right on in and join the conversation. But you can also follow me on Twitter at Jim Kalbach. But reach out on LinkedIn. I like to connect with people on LinkedIn as well, too. You can find my LinkedIn profile and send me an invite.
So on the Google page, they always have kind of a daily thing where some artist can showcase something or write something. If I would give you this space for one day, like, what would you write in there?
I'd probably write, find cheap airfares quickly.
Oh, that's that. Very nice. Well, that concludes today's Product Quest podcast. Please send any comments or ideas for future shows to productquestpodcast@gmail.com. See you next time.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Hey, Jim, it was great.
Sure.
Enjoyed it.